Okay, so Andy and Stu are here, and we've got with us today a football executive and an investor from the United States who has some really strong links to Ipswich Town's new owners. So we're really pleased to have with us today Jordan Gardner. Jordan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Good man. Thank you. Thanks for coming on. Where in the world are you right now?
I am in San Francisco, California. I usually split my time between Europe and the US, but obviously with COVID and travel restrictions, it's been a little bit more difficult. But I've been based in the US for quite some time now.
But with some very, very firm eyes on European football by the sounds of things, and the look down your kind of CV, that kind of thing. Stu and I, we're in Suffolk. I'm in Ipswich. Stu's just a little bit outside, and yeah, it's great to talk to somebody else with another good connection to Town's new owners, isn't it, Stu? Because it's definitely an exciting time for the football club over here at the moment.
Absolutely. Jordan, tell us a little bit about your connection to Brett and the new owners of Ipswich Town, if you could, please.
Yeah, of course. I've known Brett Johnson for about 4 or 5 years now. We met through American soccer circles with his club in Phoenix. We actually met at the very beginning when he was launching what was originally called Arizona United and then turned into Phoenix Rising. I was working on a project in American soccer where one of the owners in our group had gone to college with Brett, and so they connected us. And we kind of hit it off. I was really interested in the project that they were working on. I've been down to a bunch of games in Phoenix. I'm not obviously directly involved with the club, but I follow it very closely. I got to know some of his other investors who are also involved with Ipswich Town, Berke Bakai and Mark Detmer, also really great guys. So yeah, we've stayed in touch over the last couple of years. When I launched the project in Denmark to buy FC Helsingor, Brett became involved and is a board member and was able to be intimately involved in that project. So yeah, we work on a lot of things in the soccer space together. I think what he's doing with the group that he's put together for Ipswich is really exciting. I'm super excited for him. And yeah.
Yeah, so just to quickly run down sort of your investments in football. You're chairman at Helsingor, Brett's on the board there, but you're a co-owner at Dundalk in Ireland, and you have some money in Swansea in the Championship over here. So you've got quite a nice little portfolio going on there, and obviously Brett's got his as well with Phoenix, and then the Rhode Island project, and now Ipswich. So it's kind of spreading a little bit, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have similar philosophies when it comes to investment in football, although a little bit different paths. Obviously, he's taken the American soccer path with what they've done in Phoenix, and they've had a ton of success. He's working on Rhode Island, which is a really interesting project. My path has been a little bit more European focused. My background is more entrepreneurial, so I find European football just really interesting in terms of coming in and you can get clubs promoted, and there's a robust domestic player transfer market. There's all sorts of interesting things you can do. And so for me, instead of launching a club from the ground up like what Brett's guys did in Phoenix, I said, why don't I make some strategic small investments in European football through the networks that I had? And again, instead of coming in and buying a big club and maybe making mistakes that other prior American ownership groups had, whether it's the American group at Aston Villa or all the various American groups that have gone to Europe and had issues, I was able to spend a lot of time on the ground in Swansea when I made that investment in 2018 when the club was in the Premier League. Fortunately, the club got relegated, but was able to kind of soak up a lot of the information in terms of how the club reacted, what did the club do well, what did the club not do well. Made an investment in Dundalk, which is a club that's been in the Europa League a couple times now. And really, I was on the board for a year and I rolled off. So those are very small investments. I'm not involved operationally at all in those clubs, but it's good to be involved in different clubs with different kind of strategies and business models. And then obviously 2 years ago was Denmark, and that's what I spend all my time on right now.
So how did that come about? Why Helsingor, and why Denmark, and why Brett?
Yeah. So, the thought process, again, going back to didn't want to necessarily go in and buy a really big club and, had a good understanding of what it took to be successful in European football, but felt like it was still important to go to a little bit smaller club. And I felt like Denmark was kind of this emerging footballing market. You saw a lot of investors going to Belgium and Portugal, and Denmark was starting to get popular. The national team's done quite well. There's a really robust player transfer market in Denmark. And, for us, it was like, look, everyone speaks English in the country. It's relatively easy to do business, versus going to a place like Spain or Italy or France where there can be some serious cultural differences. So we said, look, let's buy a medium-sized club in Denmark. Let's do that. Let's run it really well and efficiently. And then we can scale upward and make bigger investments like what Brett's done. And so when I put that group together, I called Brett and said, hey, I'm putting a group together to buy a club in Denmark. It's a really interesting club. It's close to Copenhagen, has a new stadium opening. Do you want to be involved? I know you have bigger aspirations in global football. And he was really interested. And so, he came on board. He brought a couple of his partners involved. And he joined the board, and it's been 2 years. He's been super supportive. Obviously, he has a lot of other projects he's working on as well. Helsingor is my full-time focus, where Brett is obviously working on other projects as well. But it's really good, for me, bringing people into our board and our ownership group. It's really important that they have, at least an understanding of the sport. I think we can raise American capital. Not to say it's easy, but we can raise capital from a lot of different places. But I wanted people that had a good understanding of European soccer, and that I could pick up the phone and say, hey, Brett, we're opening our new stadium in Denmark. What did you guys do in Phoenix that worked really well? How are you guys doing your ticketing and your sponsorship? Like, what worked really well for you guys? How can we translate that to Denmark? And I thought that's where people who have really vast experience in the sport like Brett can be really valuable to our project. And obviously that translates to what he's doing at Ipswich.
Yeah, it's the takeover of Ipswich has been rumbling on, from what we gather, sort of a year and a half leading up to this point. How much did you know about the things going on during that period, Jordan? Did Brett pick your brains on a few things?
Yeah, we talked a little bit. I had heard some kind of rumblings. I knew COVID had kind of slowed things down in those discussions. And having gone through multiple of these takeovers, I knew how long it takes. I mean, I think people think that it's a really easy process, but there's an incredible amount of due diligence that comes into play in terms of making sure everything checks out, and then negotiations with the prior owner and all that kind of stuff. So we definitely had conversations. We had conversations about how things like Brexit affect the business model, how Ipswich ties into other projects, both in the US and in Europe. And so, I'm obviously not intimately involved in Ipswich, but we had some conversations. Yeah.
You must have liked what you heard from both the Ipswich side and from Brett's side. It's a good club here, obviously, with a big history. So for an American group such as Brett and the Three Lions group with Burkay and Mark to get involved, that must be quite an exciting thing to see as a kind of a fellow American investor in the European game.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about the call, and I'm sure we'll talk about the Superliga stuff a little bit later. But I mean, it's certainly frustrating to me when American groups come into European football and really don't have a good grounding in terms of understanding what it takes to be successful, because that makes those of us who presumably think, I hope that we know what we're doing, makes our jobs more difficult, right? Makes it difficult in terms of credibility when we're trying to do things or trying to buy other clubs or make difficult decisions. And so I think what's great about what Brett's group has done is they have a really good understanding of what it takes, I think, to be successful. They've brought in already good people, local people that know British football. I think Brett is very much someone, from my experience, that is appreciative of the history of the clubs he's involved with. And I know he's dug into the history of Ipswich. It's a very history-rich club. So I think they're going about things the right way. Obviously, the sport is challenging, right? I mean, in terms of getting a club like Ipswich back to where it probably should be in terms of the championship, and hopefully someday the Premier League, is going to be challenging. There's no doubt about it. But I think if anyone can get the club where it needs to go, it will definitely be this group.
You mentioned you was involved with Swansea, Jordan. What lessons have you learned from your time involved with Swansea?
I mean, Swansea, for a period of years when they were in the Premier League, had a really distinct style of play. They're bringing players in from Spain. They had a very good structure, I would say, in the way the club was run. And I think, not to say they got away from it over the last couple of years, but it's difficult to maintain that level, especially when there's so much money being spent in the Premier League. And so I think my learning curve from Swansea a bit was just making sure that you have a really cohesive strategy, both on and off the pitch, in terms of building a culture at your club and building a culture on the pitch. It doesn't matter to me what formations you play or what kind of coach you hire or what kind of sporting director. It's all about what is that strategy and sticking to it. I think these clubs that change managers every 3 weeks and there's so much uncertainty off the pitch, it can really kind of affect the on-field performance as well. I also think Swansea has done a really good job on their academy. I think they've brought a lot of very, very good young players through, and which they've sold. And obviously, it's a big investment for the club to be, I believe they're a tier 1 academy. But I think that's the challenge sometimes in the UK is there's so many clubs in so many tight geographic areas, and you have the big clubs coming in and just scooping up all the best players. I'm sure to a certain extent this might happen at Ipswich. If you have your own distinct area where you can develop players, whether that's for your first team or to sell, that gives you a competitive advantage, especially now with Brexit, where you can't necessarily go into other continental European clubs and find talent like a Brentford might do. So I think those are the two areas that I would say. Obviously, it's been difficult. Hopefully, it looks like we'll be in the playoff this year, and hopefully we can get back up. But it's tough. Everyone is gunning for the same thing and trying to do the same thing and spending a lot of money. It's a very difficult place to be in.
What can you tell us about? I think we're about to ask this. We're about to ask the same thing. I think, Stu. We're about to ask about Helsingor and everything, how that's going over there.
No, things are great. I mean, it was a challenging project to kind of launch from scratch. The club had been in the Danish Superliga and then had gotten relegated twice right as we purchased the club. So in terms of a club that had kind of been at the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows, it was really a challenge to come in and kind of clean up a club that was frankly a failing business, you could say. The players didn't want to be there, coaches didn't want to be there, fans were unhappy. It was really a challenging environment. And I think for the first 6 to 12 months, it was difficult to kind of come in and put our stamp on the way we wanted to do things. But we made a really good hire with a manager who had been at a Superliga club as an assistant. We brought him in. He's a fantastic manager. We brought in a new sporting director who's done a fantastic job on recruitment. And we've had a lot of success. We got the club promoted, and this year we're in the top 4. So I think it doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that is easy to achieve. And it was certainly things like COVID made it difficult for everyone. But I'm really pleased with where the club is at right now. I think we're not going to go up this year, but I think in terms of next year being able to go up is something that I think is a realistic goal for us. At the same time, we're a club with one of the lowest wage bills in the entire division. So that's what's satisfying to me is we're not outspending anyone. We're not some crazy billionaire group splashing money around making stupid decisions. Like, we're having to make really smart strategic decisions. And luckily we've got most of those decisions right. But things are at a really good place with the club right now.
Yeah, I was going to say that when we first spoke to Brett, he was saying that it's not everyone when there's a takeover at football club, everyone gets excited about the investment and money and how much money it is. But he used Helsingor as an example of just working smart and getting your infrastructure and everything. You mentioned their lowest wage budget in the division, so it's Brett's approach isn't going to be just coming in and chucking money about. It's going to be about sort of making smart decisions and working smart. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I don't know what their strategy is going to be in terms of spending, at Ipswich. I obviously can't speak to that. But I do know Brett's philosophy in general, I think, is pretty similar to mine in terms of we're not the kind of American groups that are going to come in and just spend our way to success. That's just not why we do things. Even if it would work, which frankly, it oftentimes doesn't work. I think people assume there's a correlation between just spending the most money and winning games. And sometimes that's true, but it's not as strong a correlation as people think. I look around the landscape, in my case, in Danish football, and see the amount of money being spent on certain players and certain contracts. I'm sure the same thing it's the same in the UK. And I just scratch my head. I'm like, hey, we have a better player at that same position who's making 1/10 the amount of money that player is. So why wouldn't you have that other player? So again, to answer your question, I don't know what the strategy is to Ipswich. Look, the League One and the Championship, they're difficult divisions. There's other American groups. There's other groups spending a lot of money. And so you have to kind of get the infrastructure and the decision making right. And I have no doubt they'll do it. It's going to obviously, I'm sure, take time. So yeah.
What are the first things you do when you go into a club as an owner or an investor? What are the first things that you're looking to do once you get feet on the ground and that kind of thing?
I mean, for me, it's evaluating the infrastructure, and that's not just training ground and stadium, but it's like players, staff, coaches, front office, CEO. Are these the right puzzle pieces in place for us to have success? And frankly, most of the time, if you're buying a club that's really struggling or has had poor prior ownership, the pieces are not the correct pieces, right? There's reports, right, that a new CEO is going to come in Ipswich. We brought in a new CEO in Helsingor. We brought in new staff. We cleared out the roster. Not to say that at a takeover, every single time you have to clear things out and start from scratch. But my philosophy in general is if you want to change culture, which I think is the most important thing at a footballing organization, culture is built by people, and you need to bring in people who want to be there, who are bought into the project. I mean, we talk about players all day, every day, and that, of course, players are under contract. If they're on a 3-year contract, they can't leave the club. But if a player doesn't want to be there, a player isn't bought into the philosophy and the culture, they're not going to want to play. They're not going to perform. So I think it's on the club to create an environment where players, and both players on the field and then staff off the field and supporters as well, can buy into what you're doing and have success. And it's not easy by any stretch, right? It doesn't happen overnight. People ask, what's the recipe for success? It's little things. It's making sure that you're taking care of the players, that you have good staff, that you're giving them food, that the travel's right, and that the environment's good, that the personalities in the locker room are good. Because at the end of the day, this is a sport. I think people forget about it. It's about motivating men to perform, right? And I think people just assume, okay, they're high paid athletes, they should perform, they should score goals, they should do well. Well, there's different personalities, there's players from different parts of the world, there's different cultural differences. So I think finding the right balance on all those variables is clearly the key to success. It's not easy. It takes time. It does certainly take an amount of investment, but I think if you get it right from the top down, from ownership, who hires good, smart people in a position of a CEO off the field, who hires good, smart people as a coach and a sporting director, then it starts to trickle down to the players and they say, wow, this is a really well-run organization. Yeah, we maybe have lost 2 games in a row, but no problem. We'll be fine. We'll push right through it. That's, to me, the most impressive thing that I've seen in Helsingor is you go into the locker room or you go to training the next day after we've lost a game or lost 2 or 3 games in a row. Everyone's still really positive. The environment's still really good, because when we first bought the club, it was definitely not that way.
What attributes has Brett brought to Helsingor then in his role? What are the key areas that you would say he's contributed to your success there early on?
Yeah, I mean, he's been really supportive in a lot of different areas. He's brought a couple other business partners that he has that are fantastic guys to our ownership group, who have been really valuable. Obviously, just on an operational day-to-day perspective, on a board level, he's very incredibly supportive of what we're doing at the club. I would say, again, like I said earlier, just picking his brain on different areas on the operations side is important. Being completely honest, he's not obviously super involved day to day because he has other projects he's involved in, but we talk pretty frequently, and he's just a really valuable soundboard for what we're doing. And I think it's not to say that one person is the reason we're having success, or it's me or it's Brad. We have a really great board and a really good ownership group. We have a WhatsApp group. We're watching all the games, figuring out what players we like, what players we don't like, if we can figure out what the announcer is saying during the game in Danish or not. So I think Brett has brought really good positive. I mean, you guys have talked to Brett. He's a really positive guy. He brings so much positive energy. And so he brings that to our board and our club when he is involved in what we're doing. And I think that's really valuable to us.
And you guys are working together on the A-League expansion with Central Coast Mariners. Where are you at with that?
So we've been working on that project for a couple of years now. We were part of an expansion bid. They went through an expansion process kind of like MLS did, where they took bids for different markets. And this was in 2018 or 19. And we partnered with a local group of the Gold Coast to put a bid in. Fortunately, bid wasn't selected. But we kind of stayed in touch with the local guys. And then the potential opportunity for the Central Coast popped up probably about a year ago. We knew the owner was struggling financially and he wanted to sell. So we've stayed in touch with him. We've had conversations. We're getting closer to a point where we'll be digging into due diligence and stuff. There's new leadership in Australia where the league is being run by the owners, not by the federation. So that's complicated things and slowed things down. We both really like the market. We like Australia. It's a really interesting market. So, I mean, it's getting there. I can't necessarily say we're close, but we're getting to a point where I think it's becoming more real than not, hopefully over the next 6 months.
What's the attraction with having kind of fingers in clubs all around the world? What's the benefits, do you think, in terms of, obviously Brett would have a club in Australia, Denmark, England, and in the United States? You'd have one in Ireland in addition to some of those markets as well. What are the benefits to kind of having yourself in multiple clubs in multiple countries? What can you gain from that?
I mean, ultimately the goal is to integrate these clubs. I mean, for me, I can't integrate necessarily Swansea and Dundalk to my other clubs because I'm not a majority shareholder, right? But whether it's the A-League club and potentially Ipswich, Phoenix, and Helsingor, right, where we have more controlling interest in the club, I think the idea is, can you use economies of scale in terms of both on and off the pitch? Can there be a shirt sponsor that's a multinational corporation that wants to get into 4 different global economies? Can it be just running a business better? But honestly, what it all comes down to is developing players. I think if you can get a pipeline to talent, whether that's in the United States, whether it's in Australia, and those players can come through and then eventually be playing for Ipswich, I think that's where there's a lot of value in having these different clubs. Of course, we generally feel that as standalone clubs, each one of these investments on its own is really valuable and important and doesn't need a tie-in with other clubs. But again, I think that's where this is a very relationship-driven business. And certainly if you have a club, again, I'll give you guys a really good example. We have a very good young player on Helsingor who's out of contract in the summer, and he wants to test the markets. It's the first time he's really going to be a free agent. And I have a feeling if we were part of a global network of clubs, of bigger clubs, what we could really do is go to him and say, look, like, we can just sign you to a contract to this bigger club in our portfolio. Maybe you're only 22, you're not ready to play for that club. We'll just loan you back to Helsingor. You'll play for a year. You're still in our network, and we can continue to develop you in our culture, because, you know, clearly you enjoy what you're doing. You want to stay in our organization, but you do have ambition, right? So I think it can help maintain talent. Obviously, things get a little tricky with Brexit in terms of if you have a club in the UK, how does that work in terms of getting work permits? But ultimately, can you have access to a pipeline of talent over many years? I think that's the allure of the kind of multi-club model.
Do we need to take this guy's name, Jordan? Can we pass him on to the Ipswich recruitment team? Is he going to do a job for Ipswich next season, do you think?
I don't think he's quite ready for that. I think it's another interesting example of, he's 22. He's got all the talent in the world to play at a level of League One or Championship, but he's just not there yet. So I think he needs more time. But it's a good example of, like, can you create the right development pathway for a player? Because if he jumps to a bigger club right now and he doesn't play at all and he's not ready, that's not going to help his development either, right? So can we get him to buy into the fact that we think it's the right path for him to stay within our portfolio of clubs? That's the idea.
Can I just take this right back to the start with you, Jordan, and your love of football in general? Being an American, growing up, it's not your national sport. How did you fall in love with it? Because clearly Brett and the guys have, you know, love the game as well. These aren't just business people that are coming into it. So, what's the football story for you?
Yeah, I know it's kind of curious. An American so deeply involved in European football and kind of passionate about it. It's interesting because I've spent enough time on the ground in Europe now that I feel like I have a little bit of a different perspective. Like, you talk about the European Superliga and people are thinking Americans are focused on the money and, you know, so financially driven. And my first thought is like, well, why would you be in European football if you're so financially driven? I just wrote about this. So to answer your question, I played football, soccer growing up. I not quite at a professional level, but pretty close. Strong business background. You know, I always really loved the sport, and also the fact that it wasn't the most popular sport here in the U.S. That all people I knew, friends, were playing other sports, and soccer was kind of this cool secondary sport. And it was something I was just always really passionate about. And I got into American soccer, which I liked and I still follow, but European soccer was just, again, from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's like you could come into Ipswich and come in and do things really well on and off the pitch, and Ipswich in 10 years can be in the Premier League. Like, to me, that's really cool. Now, of course, Ipswich can get relegated, which is unfortunate. It can happen to anyone, but that kind of, the beauty of that system, and I've talked about this a lot recently with the European Superliga, is so interesting to me, that part of the sport, and that's what I genuinely really enjoy about this.
Yeah, I guess both as somebody who loves sport, but also as an entrepreneur and a businessman, it's that dare to dream. Anything is possible, and that's. Well, I guess we're on to the Super League part of the debate now, but that takes it all away if you have the closed competition. I mean, we were talking off air before we started. You found it a little bit embarrassing that sort of all the Americans are getting tarred with the same brush with all of this at the moment that's going on.
It's unfortunate that I wrote about this in an article for Sports Pro yesterday, but it's like, again, if you should be able, I know fans might disagree with this, but people invest in football clubs to make money. Like, you don't invest in anything not to make money, but that shouldn't be your sole your sole motivation. There has to be more. You have to be passionate about it, right? Like, I would like to hope that people hear me talk or Brett talk and feel that, like, wow, these guys really care. They're passionate. They're spending their time, their energy. Yeah, of course they want to make money out of this. Why else would we be doing it? But they're passionate about it. If you hear Joel Glazer talk, or you hear these guys talk at the top of the food chain when it comes to the European Superliga, I don't hear that passion. I just hear a lot of self-interest. I hear a lot of very financially cold-driven discussions, and I'm like, okay, there's nothing wrong with that. Go find somewhere else to put your money. I don't understand. There's better ways to spend your money and your time and energy than in European football, if that's what your mentality is, if you're not genuinely passionate about the sport. So that's what frustrates me. It frustrates me too when Americans in particular come into European football and kind of this arrogance of well, I ran a club in the NFL and it did really well, and so I can go buy a team in the Premier League and it'll do the same thing. It's no, football, soccer, it's a totally different beast, especially in Europe. You have to understand the cultural differences and everything, promotion, relegation, player transfer market, so different. And this European Superliga discussion has kind of brought to the forefront that if you're going to do this, especially as an American, you got to come in for the right reasons with a certain amount of humility and people involved in the projects who know what they're doing. And again, you could do all of that and you still might not have success, right? We still might not have, all the success in the world we want in Denmark, or, who knows what'll happen at Ipswich. But if you do everything the right way, like I like to think we do, and I like to think the groups like Brett does, you're putting yourselves in the best possible situation for success. And I think people in and around the sport in Europe start to respect that. I wrote an article also for the local Danish paper about the Superliga, and tons of Danes reached out to me and said, like, we really appreciate your perspective. It's not the traditional American greedy, money hungry perspective. It's a different perspective. And frankly, I think that's a perspective that I probably wouldn't have had 2 years ago, 3 years ago, before I started spending a lot of time on the ground in Europe.
But a perspective you clearly share with Brett, by the sounds of things. I think Berke's been quite vocal about the Super League on his social media. Obviously, he has a Turkish background, massive Galatasaray fan, so he knows as well as anyone that how badly that kind of proposal would go down. But it seems like you and Brett have some really similar feelings on these kind of matters.
Yeah, I mean, things have happened so quickly. I haven't had a chance to talk to Brett about what his thoughts are on the Superliga, but knowing kind of his investment philosophy and the way he looks at the sport and the world, I would have to think that he would feel similarly, I would assume, but I don't know.
And you said, Jordan, ultimately, there's no hiding away from it. You guys get involved to make money, and I guess to make money, the culture has to be right, and you have to do things right and with passion, and then ultimately the return on investment follows further down the line. But is there money to be made in English football? I think people look at it. The previous owner of Ipswich, Marcus Evans, has lost a big chunk of money over a 10, 13 year period. Most clubs are running at a loss all of the time, but Brett and the guys have come into Ipswich ultimately to get a return on investment. It's locked up or it's tied up with a sort of the pension scheme over in Arizona. Yourself and fellow Americans are obviously seeing opportunity in English football at the moment. Kind of outline from a business perspective what opportunities you guys are seeing when you come and invest in a European club and an English club.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the league and the business model and the size of the club, right? And the business, exactly what your approach is. Again, I can't speak. I haven't spoken directly to Brett about what the business plan is in terms of where this club needs to go. Presumably, Americans look at football in the UK, and the Premier League is where it's at, right? That's where all the money is in terms of media rights. Can you get your club there and run it as a efficient, well-run club? Can you be Burnley, right? In terms of it's a profitable business that does well, that's in the Premier League every year. That's just me speculating. Presumably, developing, selling players is something that's really important. From my brief understanding, is that Ipswich has a good academy and has a good track record of developing and selling players. So I think that's something that's really attractive from a financial perspective. I think the thought process too is, our salary constraints from player wages going to start to come in. There was during COVID, obviously, some salary constraints. I won't call it a salary cap, but some constraints there, which make things a little bit more viable. But you're 100% right. This is a really difficult business. COVID has thrown everything out the window in terms of trying to make money. But, I think the goal for a club in Ipswich is to get it to higher levels, which increases the value of the club. It gets it to a point where you can sell players at higher value dollars, and you can capture more of the media rights. Like what we're doing in Denmark, for instance, it's different at a different scale, but same kind of thing, selling players, getting the club to a higher level, selling the club at some point down the road. So it's a little bit difficult to answer the question because it depends on the club. And again, I can't speak necessarily to Ipswich, but I think there is potential. Certainly there's a lot of potential to run clubs better and more efficiently. I mean, I haven't looked at the financials on Ipswich, but I've looked at financials on a lot of different clubs, and you just look at it and you're like, I could cut I could cut salaries, I could cut all this stuff in half tomorrow, and no one would bat an eye, and the club would lose a hell of a lot less money. And that's not making difficult decisions either in terms of getting rid of good people. That's like cutting board salaries. That's reducing player wages, cutting agent fees, right? Reducing some travel costs, running a business better in terms of capturing more revenue. There's a lot of things you can do more efficiently. Not to say that it's easy by any stretch, but I think there's so much bloatedness in this industry that there is opportunities to capture some potential revenue sources, run a better business, have the upside of potentially getting to higher divisions. And then you can say, all right, cool. This can potentially be lucrative to us. And in the meantime, if we don't get there, hopefully we've run a really good, well-run business that at least can, in the ballpark, be self-sufficient. That's our goal in Denmark is, can we run a self-sufficient business while we build the infrastructure of developing players and getting promoted? no one wants to buy a club that's losing 10 million euros a year like that. I mean, how long is that going to last? You guys saw it with the prior owner at Ipswich, right? So I can't imagine that's the model with Brett's group, but again, I can't speak to that.
You must have sat side by side pre-COVID and watched games of football with Brett. What's he like during games? How is he kind of in the stands watching either his teams or any other games that you've been to together?
He gets very nervous. We've gone to a bunch of Phoenix games together. He's really passionate about it. He's just as passionate as I am. I'm the same way. I mean, he again, not the typical owner who's kind of detached or not super into it. Like, he's very into and emotional about it, and I think he's really passionate about it. Again, I don't know how often he plans to go to the UK and what his situation is with travel and all that, but I'm sure he will be over there quite frequently when travel permits.
The same with the other guys as well. Burke is clearly a passionate football fan, and Mark as well. Are they similar kind of characters at games? What can Ipswich fans expect from them when they see them in the director's box at Portman Road?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I've been directly in boxes with either of them. I mean, Burke is definitely a really passionate guy. He's a big Galatasaray fan, as if you guys follow him on social media. I can't necessarily speak to the other guys, but again, this is not a group of guys that's gonna be absentee or guys that won't be there and aren't passionate about it. These are guys that are really, really fired up about this investment. I definitely can say that, and I think it'll be really fun for them to see it.
How big's football going to get in the States, Jordan? You got the World Cup coming up further down the line. Is there another big boom set to come?
That's the $1 million question everyone's asking. I think it'll grow. I think hosting the World Cup clearly is a huge positive for the growth of the game in this country. I think the problem that people have sometimes in American soccer is they assume when American soccer grows, it's MLS, which, yes, that's a piece of it, but that it's also the Premier League, Serie A, Bundesliga, Liga MX. The Mexican league is incredibly popular. So I think the sport is going to continue to grow. The question is, in what form? Is that going to be a little bit more European focused? Is it going to be more American focused? I think MLS, for instance, is an incredibly compelling live product. They've done a very good job in many markets. LAFC, Inter Miami, they're kind of replicating the European environment in many clubs, which is great. They still, frankly, do a really poor job in terms of capturing people's interest to watch on television, which is a pretty big problem because this whole sport is built on television and media rights. But, I think it depends what angle you look, right? From our national team and player development, like, we're doing a great job, right? Our top young players are now all playing in the Champions League, and it's fantastic, right? And I think the next cycle, presumably, if we don't screw it up like we have previously, our national team should be very good. But I don't necessarily subscribe to the model that some people say here that soccer is just going to explode because the World Cup's happening and it's going to be the most popular sport. Like, it's still got a ways to go in terms of interest in the greater American landscape. But I think it's made massive jumps in popularity over the last 5 to 10 years.
I think we're probably getting to the end of our time together now, Jordan. But the only other thing I was going to ask you is when the pre-season friendly game between Helsingor and Ipswich Town is going to be arranged, because quite frankly, I love Denmark and I fancy a little trip over. When are we going to get that one lined up? Because that's got to happen, hasn't it? The Brett Johnson derby.
I mean, I think that'd be fantastic. I mean, probably not this summer because of the travel restrictions and all that, but potentially next summer. I mean, the summer in Denmark is beautiful. What's really cool about Helsingor is we're close to Copenhagen, but it's kind of in this area where there's a lot of summer homes, and in the summer, the Danish national team actually trains in Helsingor too. So there's a good infrastructure. So I think that'd be super fun. I think Ipswich came out. I was reading online that they came out to Helsingor. This was before our club was founded about 25 years ago. Came out and played a local club. I have to dig into that more, but I think that would be fantastic. I think Brentford was planning on coming out to Helsingor to train during the summer, but they nixed it because of COVID. So it's not unheard of. We played Crystal Palace in a preseason game 2 years ago, so definitely not unheard of by any stretch.
I think you'll have to warn the locals that there'll be plenty of people from Ipswich and Suffolk descending on Helsingor if that did happen, because people here like a pre-season tour. They like following their team overseas. So next time you're over there, maybe you need to warn a few of the local businesses, a few of the watering holes locally, that they maybe one day might be an invasion from Suffolk.
I'm sure they would look forward to it.
Right, I think we're going to
next year, and we'll do Australia the year after that when you've tied all that up, Jordan. Yeah,
sounds good.
Best of luck with all of that, Jordan. Thanks so much for your time. Really great to speak to you.
Cool. Thanks for having me, guys.